There might be no hotter topic in economics right now than the possibility that technology will soon take away jobs in a way that's never been seen before. The possibility that newer technologies are just fundamentally different than the ones that came earlier, and that the economy won't adapt fast enough to replace the lost jobs, if it ever does adapt.
Quiet, please. I'm doing the talking.
So what might be different now? What's new? Well, the answer is that there's now a concern that technology will begin to take over tasks that were once thought to be uniquely human. Tasks that don't just involve the strength to push a plow, or routine movements like you'd find on an assembly line, or even complicated mathematical computations that a computer can do, but rather tasks that instead include judgment, perception, and non-routine movements. Probably the best example of this kind of technology is the driverless car. When you, a human, drive a car, you're using peripheral vision. You're making constant judgments about how fast or slow you should go, or when you should turn into oncoming traffic. And you're also subconsciously figuring out how hard to step on the pedal and how sharply to turn the wheel. Even 10 years ago, it wasn't clear that this tangle of activities could ever be coded in a useful way for a machine to use. Yet driverless cars are already here. And now it seems like the biggest obstacle to their widespread use will be about regulatory and legal issues, and about setting up the infrastructure. But it probably won't be about the technology. And right now, the combined number of truck, taxi, and bus drivers is close to 3 million in the US, and that's just one example. Two scholars, Carl Frey and Michael Osborne, have estimated that nearly half of all US occupational categories are vulnerable to automation within the next 20 years. Maybe, maybe not. That's a worst-case scenario. But this might start happening even in a lot of service sector jobs that few people ever thought would be taken over by machines. So for instance, computer systems are already doing some of the work that lawyers and paralegals in reviewing documents used to do. Oncologists at Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York are using IBM's famous Watson machine to analyze the treatment options for cancer patients. Job recruiters, they're starting to use big data to scan resumes for the kinds of characteristics that make candidates the right fit for a job.
I think this application is filled out all right, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you.
Could the economy simply adapt to these trends, just as it's always adapted historically? Of course. But economists increasingly fear that if not, it would split the population between a minority of people who know how to use and complement these new technologies and are going to make a ton of money because of it, and everyone else, who either gets left with a low-paying job or with no job at all. Nobody really knows the likelihood of this worst-case scenario. But that doesn't mean it's not worth pondering or bothering to prepare ourselves for it.
This is a very important point to understand.
Now, a lot of optimists like to argue that there's no need to worry at all, that we can look to the past for comfort. After all, ever since the Industrial Revolution started about 2.5 centuries ago, when average living standards started climbing for pretty much the first time ever, and the economy started working the way it still seems to work now, it has always adapted. But let's take a step back for just a moment. Forget about all the cool new stuff that's been invented in the last decade or two. The smartphones and the smartwatches and the sleek laptops so light that you forget they're in your briefcase. And instead think of their older cousins, things like TVs and electric razors and coffee makers. These things have gotten both better and cheaper over time, partly because of globalization, but also because manufacturing keeps getting more and more efficient. Fewer people, fewer workers are needed to make the same stuff, even though the stuff is of much higher quality now. And maybe without your even noticing it, over time this process also left you with more money to spend on newer products, like a smartphone or a laptop, or just on more nights out on the town. So although these things got made with fewer workers, the process also led to more jobs for people who design new gadgets, for computer engineers, for artists, chefs, waiters, sommeliers, whatever. That's just the long-term story of progress. Better technology brings job destruction in some parts of the economy, but it leads to job creation in other parts of the economy. And overall, wages and incomes for the common worker just climbed right alongside technological advancement, in most cases because of it. But I don't buy the idea that this means we shouldn't worry, or that the story can't change. Think about it this way. People have been recognizingly human for about 50,000 years. Agriculture arrived maybe 10 or 12,000 years ago, and we've been trading with each other for more than 3,000 years. By comparison, the 250 years since the Industrial Revolution is a tiny sliver of the human experience. And just because the economy has functioned the same way since, doesn't mean that something radically new isn't about to happen again.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
Look, the point isn't to spook anybody, but just to emphasize that the guidance provided by history is different from what a lot of people think. First, we're taking all of our lessons from a very small time frame relative to the entire human experience. Second, if something radically new is happening, we might not know for sure until a while after it's already begun. And third, and most important, the lessons are complicated. Yes, the economy has always adapted, but the transition from one era to the next is often wrenching and takes a while. It's not at all clear to me that our political institutions, that modern political institutions, are actually ready for these questions or capable of bolder measures. But wherever your beliefs are on the ideological spectrum, or whatever your preferred solutions to these still hypothetical problems, at the very least the conversation has already started. That's maybe the one bit of hope that I can leave you with.
Thank you, Cardiff, for your illuminating thoughts on the restructuring process. We will pass it along to management, and should you be of further use, we'll let you know.